Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chain Agents podcast, hosted by Ram and Rahul. Today, we're going to be discussing the year that went by in the context of Web3 and the Metaverse. And at a later point in this podcast, we will be discussing what potential trends, have been sort of happening in this world for the year going forward. So, Ram, you've been intimately involved with Web3 for quite some time. And what would be your views on the year gone by? It's been a big year for crypto and Web3. What do you think were the key highlights of the year, and how is the market doing?
Hey, thanks, Rahul, and a good day, everyone. You're a bit flattering there. Maybe I should correct you by saying I've been intimately involved with Web 0, Web 1, and Web 2, and now Web 3. Right?
Yeah.
And let me try and say as best as I can how the entire year went past in the next 15 minutes. And I think if you just look back and be able to summarize this entire year, I think few events and watershed moments sort of stand out, right? But maybe before going there, it might be worthwhile talking about what is really Web3 and what are we going to encompass and try to recount into this conversation. I think fundamentally, while there have been many definitions and many ways to look at the idea of Web3, there have been trends, there have been confusions, and there's been a lot of scams as well. So it might just be worthwhile to functionally, usefully define, or just look at what does the landscape of Web3 entail? Why does it even exist? Is it even useful? And then sort of look at how it developed and what it might have for us in the future. The way I see it is simple. The internet came about because we are global people, and the way borders are defined, way nation states are defined, and way our cultures and tribes get formed are not necessarily defined by these borders that have been imposed upon us based on some arbitrary identities. We are more defined by who we are in terms of what we do, what we like doing, and what is it that we dream about. And none of these need to have a nationalistic flavor. Given that, I think Web3 is a way for us, Web2 itself was a way for us to be more global citizens. But what is lacking in it, as would be a necessary part of any other nation, state, or as a group of people, a community, is a way for us to have commerce, interact, and be able to produce things seamlessly. And Web3 essentially does that. It enables a layer of trustless contracts, smart contracts, built on a blockchain ecosystem, which enables commerce, contracts, and finance to happen seamlessly, instantaneously, and without a third party to depend on trust. This is what Web3 essentially is. And given that, I think 2022 was a very seminal year for this entire
Indeed.
space, right? Maybe I should just start with saying the three parts to the whole equation. The first is how it's valued and what size it grew to. And some of those big technological changes that came about or that really changed the shape of this Web3, which made it useful. And finally, some of the early mistakes people made and the evolutionary pitfalls we faced, which is going to lead to probably, hopefully, a more resilient system going forward. Right? In summary, 2022 was a seminal year. We saw the market cap for Web3 just in terms of the currencies and the crypto space was started at close to $3 trillion in the beginning of the year, and which towards the end of the year moved less than $1 trillion, which goes to show there has been a massive shrinkage in terms of the size. But that said, it also grew in terms of its scope. It was no longer about cryptocurrencies now. There was the metaverse, and there was AR, VR. There is DeFi space, and there is global financial organizations and nation states all and sovereign adoption of the blockchain as a technology, especially permissionless blockchain as a technology, enabling the Web3.
Nice.
Right? So in that sense, it's been a huge big bang moment in the past year, with close to half the Cambrian explosion of this crypto projects, the Web3 projects going under, while lots of new ones coming up, including there's been new operating systems like App POS, etc., which has been started by erstwhile established technology players in the Web2 space, while there's been lots and lots of true blue crypto native definitions of how blockchain is blossomed layers. I mean, first of all, there's been a clear definition of what's layer one and a scaling solution that operates on top of layer two as layer two, which enables all of them enable distributed applications at scale, and a whole lot of slew of decentralized finance at scale, and allowing traditional businesses to move from Web 2 to Web 3. In fact, recently there's been a first of a kind partnership between Avalanche, which is one of the largest layer one project, along with Amazon, and how their cloud infrastructure can be migrated. And everybody who's on Web 2 in the cloud infrastructure could potentially be part of Web 3. I think projects like these are becoming more frequent, more common, going to show that the space is maturing. Prior to that, Solana had a huge partnership with Google. Polygon has been having tons of partnership with every single person that's native. Yeah, practically, the story of Polygon might be a story of Web3 in a certain sense that really helps us define, because I think it's one of those projects that has not just made Ethereum very, very usable. I think it has really extended the use case to where the customers are, starting with simple identity-based management and just scaling some transaction systems, then moving on to NFTs and enabling gaming at scale. It has moved where the consumer demand was moving. There's privacy, identity. It's one of those great projects, which I think is really going to be able to envelop the entire space of Metaverse and Web3 as it starts evolving.
Interesting. And how has the adoption and practical use of Web3 happened in the last year? Any case studies you could think of?
Yeah, I think a couple of numbers quickly come to mind. Certainly, what makes a space like Web3 or a technology like internet really meaningful is how many people are using it and for what they're being putting it used to, right? And beginning of, I think, 2021, saw the number of people in the Web3 space, crypto, metaverse, NFTs, etc., was close to perhaps 500 million or less than that. Wow. I think in 2022, we really see this almost doubling. So it surely is one of those markets that are growing at an exponential rate, and we have close to 1 billion people who at some point in time either held a cryptocurrency, have played in a Web3 game, are actively part of this development ecosystem.
Understood. What about institutions and countries at things? There's been a big shift there as well, I believe.
Indeed, I think I think it's worthwhile, at least extremely important, to note that as the world saw a huge change happen in technology adoption during the COVID time, accelerating a whole lot of virtual working, distributed businesses, and everything retail to banking changed dramatically, making it much more easier for people to start interacting with technology during the COVID time. Likewise, I think crypto space saw a huge benefit windfall as a result of the looming recession. Right? There has certainly been a lot of awareness and concern over how our global economic situation is shaping up, with a mounting debt burden and a pretty low level of liquidity and inflation rising up more than the usual levels, leading to a lot of stringent measures from the governments and the monetary authorities, meant that currencies were failing across the board. And cost of capital is increasing much more than businesses can afford. And of course, to start with, they were curtailing their growth, but more importantly, they were also letting a lot of people go, none of which is good from an economic growth perspective. And cryptos began to be seen as a bit of an inflation hedge, as a risk management option, and not just in terms of the currencies and in terms of how the value is held, which of course was borne out because I think 2022 was the year when Bitcoin, for example, which is the largest cryptocurrency, finally became publicly acknowledged as having lower volatility than even normal equity or the US dollar.
Or gold.
Gold is probably less volatile, but it also is a lot less appreciating in terms of value. And if gold is always denominated in US dollar, in a currency, and which if it is volatile, in the end, yes, you are right, that gold in terms of value ends up having a very volatile nature. and not being a great way to hold value. And Bitcoin truly became a great way to, as at least an inflation hedge, whether in the short term or long term, because of both of its technology capability and what it was promising in terms of its limited supply and its adoptions, continued scaled adoption. And it after a point in time, despite there having lots of headwinds, it managed to hold value towards the end of 2022. So clearly, to start with, this led to not just corporates and institutions, but even sovereigns adopting Bitcoin as a national currency. El Salvador being one of the prime examples there, and that is probably the biggest example for an entire country to go not just crypto native, but enable ways to support and grow the ecosystem. As of end of 2022, I think there are close to 7 sovereigns that had already adopted it as a national currency, and potentially, Bitcoin is a de facto standard or another cryptocurrency which might be even more amenable to financial institutions adopting it. Could become their distributed currency rather than a central banking digital currency, let's say, right?
Nice. Ethereum as well had quite a big year last year, didn't it?
Oh yes, I think the story of Ethereum is also the story of potentially lots of where the crypto is heading. Until 2022 end, Ethereum and Bitcoin were one of the top cryptocurrencies, and also the cryptocurrencies which achieved this trustless governance through a mechanism called the proof of work. And proof of work had a bit of a bad name as being not very energy efficient, right? While there are arguments posted from both sides saying how the current level of energy consumption to be able to achieve a network like Bitcoin and Ethereum is energy inefficient. That is also the counter arguments that say that this is the only means by which we can denominate the cost of energy, and it has rapidly made sure the cost of energy brings down the overall network's footprint on carbon and its ability to move towards more renewable sources. Nevertheless, I think Ethereum went one step ahead and moved to a proof of stake based consensus mechanism very successfully for something like a $500 million large 100 million people user network in the trustless system to be able to make that massive change was incredible. It did it successfully without a hitch. I think proving 2 things, both that a project of that size can be stable in its entire technological base, as well as a complicated a change like this is something crypto world can handle. Very few Web2 projects or any traditional enterprise projects can claim this level of resilience and massive change having happened without a hitch.
Yeah. I mean, it was quite a very, very big event in the crypto world. Ethereum shifting and seamlessly shifting without any major issues. But
it became overnight. Just a statistic, right? Overnight, Ethereum consumed less than 3% of its energy footprint after the proof of stake move. So that itself goes to show what's the level of impact and reduction in terms of efficiencies that a crypto project can achieve, given evolutionary learning that it's been happening.
Agreed, and much needed for the naysayers.
Oh, indeed. I mean, there are always going to be naysayers. In all fairness, and the openness that the crypto world is, Web3 world is philosophically aligned with, we got to understand that the traditional world has a reason to continue doubting anything that's dramatic, anything that's pretty much going to upend everything that we do. And there have been a fair share of course, the pitfalls that have come about in the Web3 space as it matures.
Absolutely. Okay, the last section of this deals with the couple of, there's been a few major negatives in the industry last year as well, I note. There's been some major crashes. Tell me a little bit more about that.
As a good evangelist, I would not call them negatives. I would certainly call them growing pains, an essential part of every maturity, right? But you're right that when there is going to be a Cambrian explosion like what we witnessed in the crypto space 2 years ago, with the number of projects growing from a few hundreds to a few thousands, and most of them as fly-by-night operators, and of course, rightly called as S** coins, it is bound to have cleansing period. And I think we saw a fair bit of that during 2022. And notably, we also saw that most of the failures that came about, most of the weaknesses we saw in the Web3 ecosystem, also was facilitated or probably necessitated by the dependence on the Web2 infrastructure. Even Web3, end of the day, it's a technology, but it's got to be financed by traditional financial methods like venture funding. There's capital management and flow, which most of it happened pretty much in the traditional financial ecosystem. And a lot of what we saw in the Web3 space, at least the bigger impact failures, came about because we realized that we have still a strong reliance on centralized systems, and that created its own lack of transparency, which is what historically we have been trying to correct with Web3. And the obfuscation in how money is handled and how the books of the businesses are handled meant that funds could be commingled and leverage could be applied indiscriminately. And all of this, nothing that the financial world is not known for the last 5-6 decades, or all of its history. All of that we saw happen in the Web3 as well. Starting, I think, with the collapse of Luna being one of the biggest, and Voyager around the same time, and Celsius, it was a cascading effect of how liquidity just evaporated into the system. And towards the end, of course, eventually the Three Arrows Capital going bust and Alameda going bust as a result of its mishandling of leverage, saw a huge, the balloon getting burst and the bubble getting burst, and we're seeing liquidity getting corrected. Now, I think any good economic system needs to have a balance in how leverage is applied. If there is too much leverage, it's the kind of risk that's about to go bust as a result of some systemic correction. At the same time, if there is no leverage, we are operating a very suboptimal system. I think we are at that precipice right now where we are gotten to the other extreme. The pendulum has swung to the other extreme of having almost no leverage after Alameda and Three Arrows, Voyager, Gemini's, the lending protocols, all of which are now facing massive liquidity crunch as a result of leverages being misallocated. And we are at a point now that pendulum is going to have to swing back at some point in time. And one of the good news might be things like how the Binance's organization, CZ and guys have put together a relief fund for in trouble good projects, as well as the latest news that it might be more than $5 billion at least of consumer funds and FTX has been recovered. And these might be good tidings on how liquidity might re-enter the system and go back to the right kind of projects that is truly dependent on trustless systems. And most importantly, all of these lacuna has taught us and enabled us to go healthier, the system, is trying to bring in the right regulation. I think the Web3 ecosystem, perhaps early on, was resistant to regulation, partly because the regulation itself was going through its evolutionary phase. Since 2008, of course, it's seen a lot of changes and corrections, some of which has been very restrictive for innovation. For good reasons, because I think that's the nature of the traditional finance and Web2. Right? But in the Web3 space, given there is a systemic control on how we can have transparent regulation, I think the regulation space is also coming to realize that the crypto needs a lot more permission and trustless regulation. And we are hopefully moving the right direction with the white papers from the Fed pointing to the direction. And Australia, for example, a bunch of the leading nations have started publishing their initial hypothesis on how they want the Web3 space to be regulated. And some of them have been quite promising, with industry players from the Web3 also contributing to the zeitgeist.
I would also say that a lot of it was due to either human error or human manipulation, in a sense. I mean, FTX comes to mind very strongly, so does Dokon and, Terra Luna, right? There would be, the issue is that there is no regulation, or there's very little regulation for bad players. So those kind of things, I think we will be talking about in the next section, which is what we're going to be expecting in 2023.
Totally right. So there is no cure to the human nature. We have the entire spectrum of people who are extremely munificent and altruistic to the extremely corrupt. And it's not that the people in the middle will never go to the other extreme. Yeah, given the right circumstances, a saint becomes a sinner and vice versa. We have stories everywhere of this happening, from Ashoka the emperor to Sam Bankman-Fried, usurper, right? Yeah. So Rahul, I think after having talked about Web3, I'm very curious for us to get into, as well as the audience, to get a sense of one specific aspect or the other aspect of where the technology is heading towards, and one that you have been an expert in for much longer than most of the world has been, and before even people got to know about this word of metaverse, right? Can I hear from the OG of Metaverse? What do you think? What is Metaverse to start with? And what do you think 2022 meant for the Metaverse?
Well, that's interesting. People get very surprised when I tell them that I've been doing Metaverse development since 2006 and I got into it in 1997. Everyone's perception is that, oh my God, like Metaverse just started like, last year. How come you've been so into it for such a long time? And it's a common perception brought about by the fact that like early 2022, Mark Zuckerberg really grandly announced that he's changing Facebook's parent company name to Meta, and they're getting into Meta Horizons and Meta Workrooms, and they're really making a big, like $30 billion push into, setting up the metaverse. Now, an A-list company like Facebook announcing such intentions like this, it definitely brought about like quite a huge resurgence of interest in metaverses in 2022. The last time I saw this kind of hype happening was in 2007, when I just about gotten into metaverses and Second Life became like a huge thing. I was developing stuff on Second Life, got a lot of, publicity, I guess, for being one of the first Indians to actually get into the whole paradigm. And since then, I've been, it's been a running joke with pretty much everyone who knows me that I'm like, dude, the metaverse is just around the corner, man. I've been saying that since 2007, and I do feel like a bit of an idiot that it's happened like, 10 years later. It's interesting. So
has it happened already, or is it still around the corner?
No, it's still around the corner, man. Like it's not like I'm not going to believe it till it comes into play. The thing is that plus with all of the hype around NFTs and cryptocurrency and all that happened in 2021, there's been a huge surge of what I call crypto metaverses, right? Now, let me just differentiate a little bit here, okay? People are building metaverses, like Horizon Worlds is, according to them, a metaverse. Second Life is also constitutes a metaverse. But there's a difference between metaverses and the metaverse, right? Now, the metaverse is supposed to be the successor, the logical successor to the internet as we know it, where all of these virtual worlds are combining into one giant sort of platform like the internet at the scale of the internet itself, where people are meeting as avatars, they're doing their daily work, they're actually getting jobs. And it's beautiful because there are no geographical restrictions to this. Now, if you look at the fact that, till very recently, even remote jobs were not like very, very accessible. It was kind of unheard of to sit in India, for example, and do a job in the US. Right now, that also came very much into the public consciousness over the last couple of years, right? So, and now there are like metaverses of all types. So there are the conventional ones which don't use cryptocurrency. Like I would count Roblox and Fortnite and Minecraft as metaverses themselves, because it is that same paradigm. It is that same going into it as an avatar, having your own, establishing your own identity within it. They are like, they do constitute metaverses, right? Then come
so help me understand, yeah.
Go.
Sorry, please finish.
Then come the crypto metaverses, right? Decentralized, Sandbox, Somnium Space, upcoming ones like Wilder World and Mazimatic. Like there's a whole slew of them that are just around the corner. Then come the VR metaverses, which is Horizon Worlds, which is Alt Space, VR Chat, like Rec Room and stuff and all. And there's a ton of other things in between, like Spatial, for example, or Meta VR SE, which are platforms for helping people sort of establish a presence inside a 3D space with avatars, but not necessarily linked to other 3D spaces to constitute a metaverse, right? So basically, all these things are coming together now, and 2022 was like a giant year for this.
Right. So the way I'm seeing it is like there is probably two dimensions to this. There is digital reality that is immersive, and there is digital reality that's not immersive.
No, I would actually say that all these things are immersive, right? The immersion just happens with your participation in it. Minecraft is as immersive easily as Decentraland would be. I would argue more so.
Yeah. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there is digital reality. Think of the whole idea of whatever is data and what is the information out there.
Right.
As part of it is where humans interact. And part of it is just infrastructure. Part of it is
I get the context.
Static, non-real time
very correct.
Information that's sitting out there. It's historical, right? So wherever it's real time, interactive, what is enabling it? Partly there might be obviously collaboration between these two, and there is flow of information and context between these two. But immersive experience is metaverse. Now, within the same two worlds, there is a layer which can be done in the Web 2, Web 1, Web 0, whatever way. And there's a part of it that is a Web 3 way. And I'm just trying to, when you said earlier that
there's a clear differentiation.
The metaverse, so I'm just hoping the audience and us on the same page on why are we talking about Web 3 and metaverse? Are they the same thing? Are they so different? Why are you even talking about them together? But there is a huge overlap there. And the reason why we're talking about them together is a few slew of technologies and abilities that has happened in the last 10 years is going to define how we are going to be able to interact with this digital world. Correct. And this falls broadly into these two realms. One that enables decentralized, trustless interaction, and one that makes it real-time immersive. And that is the metaverse part, and the former is the Web3 part, right?
The Web3 part, correct. Absolutely.
Does it make sense?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely correct. There, Web3 is a set of protocols that are going to be used in the metaverse, but not necessarily.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Yeah. I agree.
Not necessarily so. So yeah, it's interesting, because after that whole Facebook announcement, then there was, say Microsoft bought Activision, which was a huge deal, back in the time. Nvidia launches its Omniverse, which is a platform for creating metaverses, in collaboration with other teams worldwide. So there was a lot of really major interest happening. And of course, there were the crypto metaverses, which are now like, which initially came into the news because they were like earning a crazy amount of money. Even today, like a patch of land in Decentraland will cost you tens of lakhs. Yeah, it's not like a cheap thing to get into, right? So, but for me personally, the biggest news of 2022 was the OG, the man who invented the term metaverse, Neil Stephenson himself, announcing Lamina 1, which is a layer 1 protocol for metaverses. Now I'm beginning to get excited about it. And I'm realizing that, like, this might be, Philip Rosedale, who was the guy who started Second Life, now is getting back into it. So I'm seeing all these guys who were formative in the evolution of the metaverse or the creation of the metaverse themselves, and now also deciding to take an active hand in it. And for me, that is...
Why do you think that's happening? Is it because they see a potential here, or are they seeing that the way currently is developing? For example, like you said, Meta coming into this could be for its own commercial private interests. Do they see 100%. That they need to wrest back the control from the...
At some level, yes. At some level, yes. But you see, the thing with metaverses is that they're very technology dependent, right? Beyond the technology, they're very perception dependent, right? So until we had COVID, for example, where everyone was first forced to work from home and use technology in ways that they had never imagined that they would, this shift in perception would not have really happened, right? So now we're seeing that there's a convergence coming of technology and perception and usage, which will make it easier for people to understand firstly what the metaverse is, as well as do stuff within it, and it still hasn't reached that trigger, for example, that turning point, because people are still experimenting. And I'm sure it will take like a couple of years before any definitive sort of advances are made in this area. But what I am super happy about is like, finally, man, like, when I say I'm a metaverse developer, people don't go like, it's a little like,
and this is the final, the final reckoning. You are no longer an obscure skilled person, but you are the hot in demand person, right? Like data science was 10 years ago. Yeah.
10 years ago, you know what I'm saying? And VR and AR also, like I've been a virtual reality developer for like the last like 15, 20 years. The thing was that till 2020, it was tricky trying to explain to people exactly what I did and how all these technologies would be useful and contextual in their own context you know
Right.
so all of this has now just made it easier for me to do my job as well. And the task of teaching people, explaining people, showing them how stuff works has become like incrementally a lot easier. So I'm happy about that you know
Amazing, amazing. So I think one more last question in this would be the way I'm also seeing it. Please add more information or correct my perspective. Is that today the metaverse seems to have taken a bit of a fork on the road. There is one in metaverse which is at least started out lots in the gaming space, and
yeah.
let's say there's lands and NFTs and etc.
Uh-huh.
So which is a very public consumer facing one, and that is just the
Hmm.
industrial aspect of the metaverse, which is
Hmm.
enabling better production, better organizations, uh, remote collaboration, I don't know, better
Hmm.
education, learning.
Hmm.
So do you think there is something that's significant that's happening there in terms of, is this two different worlds? Is this still the metaverse, or are there two metaverses? And
Um,
how was 2022 for this in this terms?
Got it. So there is a paradigm shift. Like, you see, the thing is, these are all metaverse technologies which are now becoming metaverse enabled.
Mm-hmm.
So, see, the thing is that Web 4, I mean, Industry 4.0 and the industrial Internet of Things, plus IoT, plus digital twins, they're all really coming into the forefront now. And these are all technologies I would say are associated with the metaverse at some level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And are very fascinating because they are actually, useful. They're very, very practical. They can be actually used by people, and there is no other technology that is equivalent to them in terms of efficiency. Right. So a lot of these enterprise and industrial technologies will also merge into the metaverse once it comes in. It's going to be a tightly knit, sort of integration of all of these technologies, right? So, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, I mean, a really interesting use case, for example, would be you can go into your virtual house and switch on the lights in your real house.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be that level of integration, and it is all really, really coming together. Because pretty much all the industrial giants that I know of are also experimenting very heavily with technology like digital twins. There are entire
Mm-hmm.
cities like Singapore and Dubai have already announced the initiative to make their entire framework and logistics and city-wide planning and stuff completely digital. You know, so I'm seeing a very, very interesting convergence happening here between the industrial and the personal aspects of the metaverse as well. That at some point
Mm-hmm.
these technologies are going to be as ubiquitous as the Zoom calls that we're in these days, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's
So
an
on that
exciting.
note, we surely should be doing one of these podcasts on the VR, I'm guessing, right?
Oh yes,
On the
100%.
metaverse.
Inside the metaverse. Yeah, yeah. I'm an active participant in multiple. Though I would admit that Second Life is still by far above my favorite. You see, the thing is, they've had 20 whole years to actually build up the entire infrastructure, right? So the kind of stuff you could do at Second Life is not even possible in Decentraland, for example. It's not possible in any other metaverse. And plus, of course, over the years, I've built up a good, community in the sense that I have
Mm-hmm.
lots of friends who I've only met in the metaverse. I have never actually met them in
Right.
real life or had a Zoom conversation with them for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
I realize that the kind of interactions that you have inside a metaverse are very real. Are very,
Mm-hmm.
very, and the other, spin-off to that, is very interesting in the effect that it's had on me, you know, because when you meet somebody in the metaverse, you're never really sure that they're exactly who they say they are, right? So you very quickly
Mm-hmm.
start to look beyond the physical appearance of the person and start understanding
Mm-hmm.
what the person themselves is all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very interesting perception shift that's happened, and it's carried on to me in the real world. That I don't really judge people by
Mm-hmm.
their looks anymore. I don't really judge them. It's a very different person to person interpersonal communication.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it. Right. So there's clearly been a lot of adoption in the metaverse, maturing in terms of how people are both perceiving it. I think one good measure of whether the idea of metaverse is really up for mass adoption is making sure is borne out by how many brands are on the metaverse, how many organizations have already made their presence there. What are they doing there? Has it been just a fad, or
No,
what
no,
do you think
no.
is?
You see, brands and institutions, I mean, there's been a big surge in the banking sector of all people, of all places,
Mhm,
who are
mhm,
establishing their presence across different metaverses. Now, the thing is that, like everybody else, everyone is kind of testing the waters, right?
mhm,
So a
mhm,
luxury brand like Gucci will come out with, for example, a series of NFTs that are linked to real world products that you can buy, and get
mhm,
discounts on, for example.
mhm,
Nike, for instance, bought out this company called Artifact, which makes custom shoes for the metaverse, for example, as well as makes custom,
mhm,
real shoes. Like a few of those are actual real shoes that people can own and possess. Right
mhm,
now, so people are really experimenting with what you can actually do in a metaverse. Is that retail shopping experience, for example, more fulfilling and more rewarding than going to an actual physical store? Right.
mhm.
Basically, it's also really about access. Like a website you can access from anywhere. You may not have a Gucci store like right near your house. They're not
Mhm,
terribly common. So,
mhm,
then of course, post 2020, everybody was actually playing around with the whole concept of virtual events. We saw a whole bunch of these low cost, really, terrible platforms that came in, where you could call them three-dimensional, but it wasn't exactly that. So people were experimenting with that, right? And now
mhm.
people like Snoop Doggy Dogg, for instance, is having, has owns land in Sandbox, has parties there, for example. There are other virtual events that are happening, and this is across metaverses. So there was a huge, I think, BTS concert that happened in Fortnite. There are other people who are actually having, other their
It's
businesses.
happening even in India. Daler Mehndi was, I think, was the
And
first from India to do that.
yeah, so I like
And
the
now
fact
AR Rahman.
that AR Rahman's been into it for like years, by the way. He's been into
These are
AR and
all
VR.
early
He's super.
adopters and
Yeah,
innovators.
yeah. So
Absolutely.
he's an innovator, man. Like he's a super experimental guy. Really like the fact that he plays around with the tech, to the extent that he does. But basically,
Mm.
people are just trying to now. Everyone is curious, right? And there's a lot of
Yeah.
land available in the metaverse, right? And so they're trying to actually test the waters and see what this whole thing is about. How do you actually sell an NFT? How do you link it to a real world object? What happens when you transfer the NFT to somebody else? Does the real world object also have to be transferred and stuff? These are all questions that are kind of getting answered, as we speak. And because
Mm.
people are really experimenting with the kind of things, interactions you can have within the metaverse.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So brands and stuff getting in, I'm saying is a very, very good thing. And I feel more brands should get in.
Mm.
They should approach my companies for actually, establishing their presence as well. Why not? If I get some good business, wouldn't harm anybody. But I do think that's a good trend, and I do think in a few years, this is actually going to become a de facto way that people are going to be transacting with each other and interacting with each other, online, right? It's much easier to actually talk to a real salesperson than it is to talk to a chatbot, for example, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So so definitely
Super.
some
Mm.
very good trends happening since last year. So welcome back to Chain Agents, and let's now talk a little bit about the future. Let's talk about what this year holds for us. Ram, what do you think? What are your overall hopes and fears for what's going to be coming this year? What do you think are the key events?
Right. Now that we've done the easy part of talking about what's happened, let's put
Uh,
our neck on the line and say, why are we really experts in this, and try to predict what's going to be happening in the next year and upcoming future, right? I think one useful frame with which to look at this problem is that two parts. So one is what's the current state of things and how it's evolving, and what's new coming in down the line to either fix in or what the science fiction is going to bring in terms of possibilities, right?
Right.
I think the first part is obviously what a lot of people might be interested to hear. The two things is in terms of the Web3 itself, the current projects, how is the market going to grow, number one? And number two, the headwinds that it might face in terms of the regulation or still the lacunas that exist and what's being done to fix them. To start with, I think, first of all, the definitive trend that's going to be shaping 2023 is the Bitcoin halving. We know that while crypto has got a huge future that's not just likely to be independent of the rest of the market, at least traditional markets, today it's pretty much tied to the hip on both terms, on how the traditional market is going to be shaping up, as well as in a lot of it also depends on how the Bitcoin itself is going to be adopted. And on both these counts, it seems macroeconomically and in terms of technology, there's lots of positivity ahead. First of all, as of January mid, and hopefully by end of January, we'll know after the FOMC meeting that the Fed has recognized in US that the inflation rates have dropped dramatically. And it seems annualized, we might be hitting close to 2% inflation rate. At the same time, the delayed effect typically of these kind of rate increases, a slowdown in economy means that it seems there's been a tremendous drop in jobs, which is both going to lead potentially for the Fed and the monetary authorities to be at least tapering down the rate increases and potentially think about a future where the rates are going to go down, which is essential for the economy to pick up. And there has already been a lot of chatter on this, and the market has reacted in the past week. For example, both the S&P is up for almost 15%, when the crypto market is, and usually the way it happens, 30-40% up in a lot of cases, and in some of those, especially beaten down cryptos, it's probably up over 100% in just the last couple of weeks. And we certainly see that this is going to be the future. We already have shrunk more than we had ever shrunk in 2008, 2009. The correction that the market has seen in 2022 has been one of the most significant corrections, maybe after the Great Depression. Given that the market is certainly looking for a bounce back, and there is pent up liquidity that's sitting to be deployed, and there is also the governments who are hearkening up to the macroeconomic slowdown. Second aspect is going to be inherently in the crypto space itself. One of the big momentum movers in the crypto space is the milestone flagship Bitcoin, right? And what usually drives Bitcoin's price is, apart from, of course, the general macroeconomic situation, is the idea of how the incentives in Bitcoin's mining gets halved every 4 years. And the fourth halving of Bitcoin is scheduled potentially in Q1 2024. And typically the market always starts pricing that in at least a year ahead, right? So we should be starting to see by end of Q1 that there is already a pent-up demand getting deployed on how Bitcoin is likely to be adopted. Halving will drive up price because it increases the complexity of the mining. So if the energy costs are going to go up, the incentives have to stay in line with the increased costs. The Bitcoin price automatically goes up as a result of that. Number one. And number two is that the number of Bitcoins currently available on exchanges has been dropping dramatically. Yeah, the big whales have not really moved their Bitcoins. The number of Bitcoins that have never moved for more than a year has been going up, which means that people who are holding it are not selling it. Yeah, and the new people have to buy it only from the others who are willing to sell it, right? So there's a fixed supply of Bitcoin, and that supply is constantly dwindling and eventually and perennially moving towards cold wallets, and from which it's never coming back. And people are holding it with the expectation that the prices are forever going to go up.
Got it. The technical term, I believe, is hodling.
Hodling can be happening for any number of time. I'm pretty much saying that you can hodl on a hot wallet or a cold wallet.
Or a cold wallet.
Just saying that when it's not on exchange, it means people do not want to be trading it at all, and that's a very important indicator on driving up demand. Right, the lower the supply and the demand remains constant, and the increased demand that's expected in the future means that is going to be an exponential increase in price. So
Understood.
three angles, right? So there is the macroeconomic likelihood of bounce back. Second is the Bitcoin halving. And third is the pent-up demand within the crypto space and reduction of supply in Bitcoin.
Okay.
And if finally, more and more institutions have allocated in the past few months and got approved for their internal funds to be having crypto exposure for the customers.
I see.
BlackRock's Aladdin being one of the biggest. It's the largest fund in the world with more than $1 trillion in asset. And when a fund like that has proved that it's good, it has it is going to be allowing its customers to be able to have a portion of their allocation into crypto, primarily Bitcoin and Ethereum, means there's going to be, even if it's like 2% of a $1 trillion fund, we're looking at $20 billion. That's enough to move a market. Like, I mean, $20 billion is more than all the Bitcoin available on the exchange. So you could expect that. So there's all kind of crazy predictions that Bitcoin could go up from the $16,000, $18,000 it is right now to anywhere between 150 to, there's predictions as high as $1 million, right? So of course, yeah, and the sky is a limit, especially in crypto sphere.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very.
So given all this, we do see a lot of positive movement purely from the Bitcoin space. And not just that, the very fact that there have been more VCs investing in the last few quarters, despite all the downturn. And second is that there is better regulation coming down the pipeline, means more traditional money is going to get allocated for crypto investments, driving better infrastructure, all of which looks extremely bullish from the crypto space.
Interesting. And how about some crystal ball gazing? What do you think is going to be the new things that are going to be happening in this field?
I think before we crystal ball gaze, I think I'll let you try and have some insurance on making sure at least part of my future predictions come out right. And one good way I think I find to look at the future is while you let your fantasy run wild from a science fiction perspective. And second is I would also like to see that what is holding the market today from truly exploding to its potential. And my guess is that some of these areas are likely to be the next disruptions as technology advances, right? And I think two things comes to mind. First is that the regulatory framework has surely been a major headwind for the crypto space. And part of the reasons why the governments have been holding back is also because like general economic instability in the macroeconomic space, but also is that the way taxation and financial systems have some kind of a ability to monitor and manage the fund flows into the crypto space. Because once in the crypto space, nobody can touch your assets, right? Your assets are truly you're owned by you. It's not custodied by a bank, or it's not something that a government can control. Given that the governments have been wary about having a parallel asset class that they have zero control over. But at least one area they can control is that how money moves between our other assets, non-digitized assets, towards digital assets. This is where I think a significant change is likely to happen with a couple of countries already releasing the central banking digital currencies, and many more in the process of either beta testing it or writing white papers and ensuring there's a framework that is going to. Yeah, and India is going to be possibly be one of the early adopters in this space. US following quickly after that, and the European banks, of course, have a lot of horses to align before they can release theirs. But everybody, not a single country today has not thought about it. What is envisaged is that there might be a few models that might be in place. Or basically, is how much of it is going to be on a fixed supply model, how much of it is going to be on a euro kind of a common consortia-led currency, or is it going to be a private currency for a country? How much of it can be traceable, trackable in terms of identity, like what China has done? Some of these considerations have been debated intensely, and I believe these debates should certainly mature to a point where countries certainly start seeing the advantage in allowing the on-ramps and off-ramps from the crypto world to be facilitated through them, and so that they can regulate better.
Very interesting.
I think one of the biggest drivers is going to be this. I think there are two other technologies that might make a big difference, of course, Metaverse. And on that regard, I'm just going to leave it here so that you can expound on this further, saying that Metaverse has not only seen a significant influx in interest and investment from everybody, but I think there are a few technologies that are fundamentally driving the change there. To start with, ubiquitous 5G bandwidth and devices being able to interact makes reality highly immersive anywhere you are in the world or anywhere you are in the space.
Right.
And all of this allows for much better low latency virtual reality or immersive technologies to be in place. And we certainly see that the more that such interactions exist, the more they have to be not centralized. It has to be global. And these central networks obviously will have a huge role to play. Projects like Helium, which is now running on Solana, allow for these IoT devices to operate decentrally controlled, permissionless by people like you and me, having an incentive and governance stake in them. Right. And
Nice.
also decentralized finance has been exploding, not just because of the number of use cases that have happened and the maturity of some of these use cases, but we see a lot of traditional players like JP Morgan's Onyx entering into the space. Bank of America, the largest banks out there have all laid inroads in at least some form of either permission and at least to some extent non-permissioned ways in which they can be part of the decentralized finance ecosystem. They all see a huge advantage in this frictionless way to have instantaneous contracts and settlements, something that's been a dream in the last 100 years of modern finance. And the last of it I'm going to say is the way I think that you alluded to one of the important aspects of what's been holding back metaverse, and I would say the same thing holds back Web3 in a sense, is that we have to make a technology truly mass adopted and useful to people. We need to be able to make them feel at home. And while you can create immersive spaces, while you can create great, friction-free use cases for business, how do we enter into this and how do we represent ourselves in a virtual space, right? And all the frauds that have happened as a result of it, I think the underlying issue there has been how well identity has been managed in the Web3 space. And the lands being available for nothing, all kinds of NFTs, from bored apes to crypto punks, etc., or critties, everybody having some kind of a fad value should all see some kind of a maturity when we see that there is people like you. There's more people, first of all, who enter into the space, allow for a maturity of how the use cases develop, and also the identities being truly private and secure allows for you to be able to bring in more assets and know that your property is truly being owned by you, and there is a way for you to be able to stake claim on it and have a reliable marketplace in which to find true value for it.
Correct. Very well put. Yeah. I do see a lot of these trends actually coming in and growing very, very majorly in the coming year. So let's see how that goes.
Yeah, maybe that brings us to the second 2023 chapter, which is, I think it's going to be a big story. I'd love to hear from you and crystal ball gaze so that we can be prepared for where do you think Metaverse is going? It's been still around the corner, but I do think the corner is in 2023. What do you think?
I think so, yeah. Like, see, the thing is that at one level, right, the elephant in the room here is artificial intelligence, right? AI is going to be very, very instrumental in helping people create these spaces for their own metaverses or set up metaverses themselves. We're already hearing about ChatGPT and how it is getting in terms of code. Just give me a second. And sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, the boss rules the house. And you see, the thing is that AI is an extremely valuable tool when it comes to actually developing these things, developing the code bases for them, developing the art and the 3D assets and stuff like that. So that I think is going to be a huge trend in 2023. The increasing use of automation that allows even regular people who are not like developers or artists or especially necessarily even in the field to actually create their own situations and circumstances and spaces and things like that. So definitely, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be very, very instrumental in one sense. Like you mentioned,
Hmm.
5G and technologies that are coming in bring across higher levels of bandwidth to the general public, which is also very necessary because metaverses even today are very, very bandwidth intensive. You know, so the idea is that it's going to actually open up a lot of doors to a lot of people to actually start experimenting with these technologies once they get the bandwidth and the hardware to be able to do it. Right? Most metaverses today do not require major amounts of hardware, which is another very big difference from what used to happen in, say, 2007, right? Where even if you wanted to run Second Life, you needed a graphics card on your machine. You could not like it, you needed a fairly high-end machine. And while that's true of virtual reality, for instance, pure VR and XR experiences, it's not so true of metaverses, because say something like Decentraland, which is very low in resources, which is pretty simple, can pretty much run on anything. It doesn't really need, except mobiles. There are no metaverses still on mobile, which I do think is going to be another trend. But people are going to have to crack how to get that user experience happening inside metaverses on smaller screens. Right.
Hmm.
Then the other huge trend that I see coming up, and this I'm hoping will happen sooner rather than later, though it is looking like it's going to be a little later, um, is that the Metaverse Standards Forum, is going to
Hmm.
establish a key standard like TCP/IP or HTML for Web 2,
Hmm.
that will allow for a high level of interoperability between metaverses. The issue here is that metaverses are very linked to your identity, right? And it would be good if you could carry your avatar, your wallet, all the stuff that you've bought, all of your core identity in the metaverse, which is your avatar, into all of these different virtual worlds. So I'd like to go into, say, Decentraland with my own avatar from Second Life, because I've spent like 10 years accessorizing the hell out of him. I have some really neat gadgets. I have some really nice codes. I have some cool clothing, so it would be good if that interoperability happens so that people can have the benefit of all these metaverses without actually having to re-log in, re-register, re-sign in for every metaverse that they're getting into.
Hmm.
In that context, the platform Ready Player Me is really, really going great guns that way. Their avatars are directly integratable into, say, Somnium Space or I don't know about Decentraland, but they are open to pretty much every platform that exists today, right? So the ability to take that same avatar and make him move for into different parts of the experience is a very vital thing that really needs to start happening like yesterday, right? The
Right.
third thing is that we're going to see an accelerating trend, or at least some of these major decentralized metaverses like Mazimatic and Wilder World, which are promising absolute photorealistic,
Hmm.
environments and amazing collectibles and stuff. A lot of these metaverses are actually slated for launch in 2023, despite the fact that they
Right.
pretty much a lot of them started in 2021. They were just developing their things in 2022. So hopefully this year we will see a slew of these launches that are happening, which will get that excitement level a lot higher, for what metaverses are and what you can do inside them. Industrial and enterprise metaverses is on a very, very strong track. And I think that track is just going to start accelerating in 2023, because this, to me, at the moment is the best use case for metaverses because they're practical. I have a touch point, like even when I'm creating VR applications or augmented reality experiences and stuff, my touch point is that is the technology you're using replaceable by any other conventional mass adoptive technology existing on the planet today, right?
Hmm.
There are obviously things you could do in virtual reality that are absolutely impossible, using flat screens. You need that three dimensions happening. You need that depth perception. You do need that, overall level of incredible immersion. And I'm talking in
Hmm.
the context of, say, training simulators, for example, right?
Right.
So I
Hmm.
want a deeper integration between VR and the metaverse, but at the moment, they're completely separate things. You can't go from a VR metaverse to a non-VR one. So there would be, I mean, it would be ideal if some of that trend starts happening, and I feel it would start happening first in the enterprise business and the technology sector rather than the manufacturing and industrial basically. The last thing that I foresee is that because there's, it's very interesting that metaverse is not really linked to crypto. So all of the downsides, all the stuff, the drama that was happening in crypto, just somehow or the other kind of got escaped in metaverses in a sense, right? Metaverses have been on a steady growth track for the last like 2 years now, and I do expect that growth track to kind of accelerate and at some point become like exponential. Right. So, and that'll only happen once you actually find tangible, clear use cases for, metaverses, which are not possible by other technologies, which I do feel there are going to be some seminal moments happening this year, and I'm really, really looking forward to them. So, yeah.
Very interesting. And I think I'm going to double down on one of the specific aspects that you talked about. And I think I do have a little bit of interest and deep awareness of where especially AI is going. And I want to further your argument. You said that strangely, immersive spaces and digital assets not just make our lives sort of better from traditional technologies, it might even make our life better from what reality itself is. Like what you said, flight simulation has its cost if you had to actually do it in real terms. To actually see what a crash test happens, how will you survive a crash? It's a lot more costly to do it in real space unless you are Tom Cruise and you can write it off in your Top Gun budget. But that's it, right? So clearly there is one aspect is how technology itself is going to make reality better. I think another interesting space I think technology is going to garner a lot of interest is how it can overcome bias, right? So reality has its limitation that when we interact with somebody in front of us, inevitably as humans, we are going to bring in a screen of our pre-existing notions about the other person, right? Whether you are somebody who's interviewing with maybe you're one eye blind, and incidentally the two big Nobel Prize winners in 2022 were half blind. Clearly, it didn't stop them from being the most amazing people in the world. Or looking at the race and color of a person or a gender of a person when you're interacting with them. Bunch of these things with creative identities. And it all comes down to now the real ability of a person in the interaction one-on-one and the true grit and net worth of what they can achieve. In a lot of ways, having these virtual identities might enable better interactions. And the last but not the least, I think I want to, again, add a zoom in on this idea of AI and where it's gone. I think obviously the way technology initially gets adopted is where there is the most number of people willing to pay for it, or where there's maximum number of interest that can be garnered, right?
Or usability.
But unfortunately, usability often when it's it requires some sales, and when there's sales, there's friction of people being convinced. And in the early periods, they don't want to pay for something that's totally new. But what they might do is something that's very interesting, is always easy to pay for, and even if it's a small amount of money, like what ChatGPT did as and not just artificial art, but what Alexa and the conversational devices did 7-8 years ago, and prior to, and all of this goes to show sometimes technology ends up having a route to entry which is not necessarily based on ease of use, but just how very interesting it is and how it can capture our fancy in some ways, right? And I do feel AGI has now almost come to the stage, and specifically I'm calling it artificial general intelligence because there is more and more proof after, of course, Google's AlphaGo and the DeepMind models started finding new ways of solving human interaction better than humans themselves can do, right? Now, what not only OpenAI is achieving in terms of its art, video creation, and narratives, I think what's not yet coming into the mainstream news is there's a huge number of Chinese AI agents that's being done by Baidu Research, for example, Tencent and Baidu, and what Google has been doing behind the scenes on DeepMind. Some of these, they have trained thousands of models for every single human interaction possible, whether it is speech translation, music creation, teaching children, empathizing with people, to the extent that I was just looking at it sometime a little while ago, there's a later generation of LLM or language learning models where these bots perform better in recognizing emotions and interacting with humans than humans themselves do. A typical SAT passage or identifying humor, it seems when blind tests were done, the AI was able to understand the real reason of humor and respond back better than a lot of humans could. Um,
Yeah.
and humor to me is the last frontier where AI is going to be, I thought, worse than
Yeah.
humans. If they've gotten there, I really look forward to a future where the AI is able to, at least in a lot of sense, replicate what people are doing, and in some ways be able to overcome some of our biggest blocks and biases that we have by making somehow more intelligent systems.
Yep.
And as long as there is a framework that's checks and balances in place, which seems like it's one of the biggest things that's being done by the AI communities to ensure that there is ethical AI. With both of these forces operating in together in balance, I look forward to a future where our real immersive or virtual immersive spaces has interactions that you cannot distinguish between with reality, and sometimes
Yeah.
it's much better than reality.
I hear you. I, for one, welcome our AI overlords, make our life better for us, please.
Better than
So
aliens any day, yeah.
very day. So, okay, just to wrap it up, just to sum it up, it's looking like a fantastic year coming up. I mean, barring unforeseen things like COVID and other situations. Right, but it is looking very positive for both of our industries that way, for Web3 as well as both of these industries, Web3, Metaverse. And can't wait to see what's going to happen. Yeah, and can't wait to be a part of it. Actually, the thing is that now that metaverses are back, I'm into them full time, and honestly, I'm having the time of my life.
We are already a part of it, Rahul, and I can't wait for bringing in the next 5 billion users on this as well, so they
I
can all benefit from it. Yeah.
correct,
And
correct.
I really look forward to a future where there's no more 2008, 2009,
I
and there's no more FTXs, and hopefully we have better governance and lesser wars.
absolutely, I completely agree.